Welcome, everybody. Great to see you. Thanks for tuning in. Let's make sure we're distanced properly. Okay. If you look at the way the Gita starts out, with Sanjay having a conversation with Dhritarashtra, and they're describing Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield. So, and then you're kind of telescoped out at that point, and then you move into the actual conversation. But when Arjuna begins speaking with Krishna, he's filled with stuff he wants to say. He's got like a whole bunch of things that are on his mind that are bothering him. And Krishna lets him go. Talk himself out. And Krishna interjects occasionally, and he doesn't really do much active listening. You guys know what active listening is? Raise your hand if you know how to active listen. How do you active listen, Ross?
You sort of repeat back what the person's saying so they know that you understand what they said.
You repeat back what the person said so they know you understood what they said. That is incorrect. That's repeating what the person said. You think you know better, Miss Preschool Teacher?
Well, man, maybe I haven't been active listening for the past 10 years, but almost like sports casting what the person has said, but in a compassionate way so that they can know that you care about what they're saying and that you understand what they're saying.
You compassionately repeat what they say.
I guess from the preschool, that's a preschool perspective.
All right. I mean, it's not worse than what Ross said. What do you got?
I would say saying yes.
First of all, you're a licensed therapist, so if you don't know, I'm gonna
would include what
I'm gonna
they're
pull
saying.
I'm gonna pull your LCSW card right now. What do you got?
I would include what they're saying in the definition and also add nodding your head or like nonverbals or saying yes or no.
Really? You were half in, half out. They all failed, and they were fully gung-ho. You really think you're gonna do this?
Essentially, I don't know.
All right, let's go.
I guess that active listening is a form of listening where you're actually seeking to understand where someone's coming from. Like,
That is true. That doesn't tell you the technique. That's a good theory. Active listening involves paraphrasing back to the person what they said to you. Not exactly what they said, but paraphrasing it. But what it really involves is naming that emotion. And that's what all of you missed. When people are talking to you about stuff, you're supposed to add in an emotion. So somebody will come to you and they'll go, "It's just too much. So-and-so won't leave me alone. They're bugging me all the time. They're getting on my case. I'm sick and tired of it." And you say, "You sound pretty frustrated that so-and-so's riding you." Then they go, "I'm not frustrated. I'm angry." And you're like, "Oh, okay, I got it. You're angry about it." And then they're like, "I'm not angry. I'm just sad." And you're like, "Oh, so it's like it's really you're sad about it." And you just keep going down the rabbit hole with them, helping them to get in touch with how they feel about something. You follow? Did you miss that?
Mm-hmm.
Did you miss that? Did you miss that? Did you miss that? That's why you guys didn't get it. There's definitely some nonverbals. There's definitely some nodding of the head. There's definitely some compassion, although we'd have to figure out how you manifest that compassion. And definitely the theory of trying to understand the person is there. But the critical feature of active listening is that you help the person to go to a deeper place, which inevitably entails helping them to get in touch with the emotional content of what's going on. Because if they just wanted to tell you raw data, there'd be no reason to. It's just raw data is just raw data. The very purpose of socializing something and talking about with somebody else is you want them to understand how you feel about it. Does this make sense? Anyway, Krishna doesn't do much active listening on the front end of the Gita. He actually exacerbates the problem. It's like a reverse psychology type thing. It's like a quick therapy, rapid therapy, short therapy technique where you just exacerbate the problem. So the person says to you, "No, I'm no good. I'm not good at anything." And they're like, "Yeah, you suck at everything." You're like, "No, I don't." And like, I think you do. I'm like, "I'm good at this and this and this." And then you say, "Oh yeah, maybe you are okay at some of that stuff." And so you just go with them to the ninth plane of hell, and then they end up pulling themselves out, and it saves you a bunch of time, especially if somebody likes to play the victim. Then you don't play into their victim game where they just want you to validate them and indulge them. You go the opposite way, and then they got to therapize themselves. They hate you for it, but it's a way of short-circuiting somebody in the long and circuitous route they'll take you when they want to play the victim. Right? Good analysis, right? All right. So anyway, Krishna does some of that. It's a little short therapy. He's only got 45 minutes to solve all of Arjuna's problem, so he can't mess around by being too empathetic on the front end. And so he starts off and is like, "You sound kind of impotent." "You sound weak." And it just like foments this whole thing. And then Arjuna finally is ready to listen and take some advice. And Krishna opens up and he says, "You're mourning for what's not worthy of grief." But the classic thing he says, "Gatasun agatasungscha nanu sochanti pandita." He says that pundits, learned people, they na anushochanti, they don't lament. They don't lament. For gatasun agatasunscha, they don't lament for people whose lives have passed or for people whose lives have not passed. In other words, they don't mourn for the living or the dead. That's kind of the famous first line of Krishna's instruction. Arjuna's freaked out about his relatives dying, and Krishna says, learned people don't worry about people dying or living. They're not lamenting that. They're not grieving that. Na anushochanti. It means they don't lament from shok, which means to lament or to grieve, to suffer. That's the first real teaching of the Gita. Takes place in the beginning, middle of the second chapter. Prior to that, Krishna's just kind of messing with Arjuna, and Arjuna's just kind of vomiting everything out. Then, kind of the last instruction Krishna gives Arjuna, he says, Sarva Dharma Prityajya, completely give up all Dharma. Which sounds kind of tantric, like a little antinomian. It's not. Completely give up all Dharma. Mam ekam shadanam braja. Braja means go. So, not like Vrindavan, Braja, or Vraja, not like that. Braja is also a name for Vrindavan. But Vraja means, in Sanskrit, it means go. In the imperative, go. Go do what? Ekam, do one thing. What is it? Mam sharanam, surrender to me. give up all dharma and just surrender to me. Aham tvam, I for you, sarva papebhya mokshayishami. I will liberate you from all pap. Pap generally means sin in Sanskrit, but it also means danger, fear, inauspiciousness, difficulty, etc. I will liberate you from all difficulty. Moksha means liberation. Mokshaisha means I will liberate. I will liberate you, sarva papebhya, from all difficulty. This is the final teaching of the Gita. And then Krishna says, ma shuchaha. That's from the same shok. It means don't worry, don't lament, don't grieve. And so our acharyas, about 500 years ago, they said, just see, Krishna's first instruction says, na anushochanti, don't lament. And his last instruction says, literally, it's an instruction. It says, the first one is, the learned don't lament. So if you want to be learned, but if you don't want to be learned, if you're like, I want to be foolish, then you could still lament. It's more of a descriptive statement. But the last statement is a direct instruction. Krishna says, it's prescriptive. Krishna says, don't lament. You follow? There's descriptive statements. The table is 3 feet long. Then there's prescriptive statements. You should do this. You must do this. So Krishna starts out with a descriptive statement. It's much more detached. And he finishes off with a prescriptive statement. You must do this. Here, it just literally is, don't lament. But our teachers, our acharyas, our commentators noticed that it's bookended. Not lamenting is the first and last teaching of the Gita. Do you guys follow this? Now, if somebody said to me, how do I know that Krishna is speaking the truth, that he will personally intercede in your life and help you out in a difficult circumstance? And this is not a monergistic spirituality where all the blame is on God's shoulders. It's also not you're building a stairway to heaven. There's a synergy. You have to do your part, and then Krishna does his part. You surrender to Krishna, and then Krishna takes responsibility for you. Did you dye your hair? Okay. Just want to make sure I was saying something wrong with me. Krishna then does his part. That's synergy. You do your part, Krishna does his part. You follow? It's called synergism in philosophy of religion, versus monergism, which is everything is on God's shoulders, from monos, which means one. So, certainly there's all sorts of ways we could analyze the verse. That the dharmas you're giving up are the worldly dharmas to do the supreme dharma, which is surrendering to God. There's ways you troubleshoot the verse, and the verse is interesting and deserves exploration. It's a super famous verse in the Gita. Every pious Hindu knows the verse by heart. You know the verse by heart? In Sanskrit? Okay, yeah. I mean, most devotees, this will be one of the first verses you learn when you memorize a verse. Like Uddhava for sure knows the verse. You know the verse by heart?
I don't think I know what verse you're talking about.
Savadamam Priyajah, Mamekam Sharanam Braja. Yeah, you know it? I just explained it in graphic detail. How would you not know what I'm talking about?
I think I spaced out for a second.
You'd have to space out for more than a second. I spent 5 minutes going through the verse in detail, every single word of it.
Now you switched gears to talk about another verse, but
Okay, I'm just going to move on. I'm just going to leave my vex right here. And I'm going to move on. Okay, so it's a very, very, very well-known verse. And it certainly deserves a lot of focus. I don't want to focus on the verse other than to ask you guys, what if somebody said to you, how do I know that Krishna's telling the truth? That's my question. Everyone want to answer the question for me real quick? Then we can just end class early. whether you raise your hand or not, let's get serious for a second. You quote this verse to me, and I say, I don't have faith in that verse. Give me some evidence that I can have faith in that verse. I want to put my faith in that verse. I'm sincere, but I have doubts. Tell me how and why. How can I have faith in that verse? Why should I have faith in that verse? Help me. What would you say? It can be rhetorical, but if you think you got it, I'm willing to listen. Loud.
I would say you shouldn't have faith in the verse until you have a full understanding of who Krishna is outside of what this verse is saying. And that will allow you to appreciate the verse. And in order to do that, you would have to learn about the nature of God. And that's the end.
You know the answer, but that wasn't the answer. But from what you said, I can understand that you know the answer. Nick, did you hear what she said?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. I can tell from what you said that you know the answer, but what you said, like if I was a teacher or anybody was sitting here, would that be an answer? You're just begging the question and evading the question. I don't even know how I'm supposed to see what you said as even an attempt to answer my question. You want to try again? You can do it. You've got the answer. But I'm not going to hand it to you on the silver platter. And what you said, you then say to me, I want to have faith, please help me. I'm like, you cannot have faith until you properly understand. Once you understand the nature of Krishna, then we can have this discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. What then do I ask? Ryan? We're having a mumble contest here? What's the next question?
How do I have faith in Krishna?
Sure. What's the nature of Krishna? How do I have faith in Krishna? How do I know that Krishna exists? There's a million questions I could ask, but it's the same thing. It's just you're just begging the question by creating another question that has to be asked with the same amount of enthusiasm, and you just disturb me more than anything. You want to try again?
Yes.
But let's not waste time. Go fast. Let's go.
You shouldn't have faith in the verse until you actually properly understand the nature of God.
You already said that.
And
Keep going.
In order to do that, you have to start at the nature of this world, what you see happening in this world, how you can explain this world, what God must be like, and from there you want to do an experiment.
How do we do? You have to understand the nature of this world, and we have to talk about what God must be like. How do we skip over the idea that there is a God?
That would be something
All right. You did much better there the second time around, but you still missed it. The way I answer questions like this is I do not attempt to give people faith in this verse. Because it's a verse in a book. What are we going to it's just, it's a piece of, what I want to do is I want to ask you, does God exist? And if God existed, what would God's nature be like? And if God, let's say, had a nature that was being all good and all powerful, would this verse be reasonable? Would this be something that an all good and all powerful deity would say? You follow? So let's start from the beginning. You don't believe in God. Great. Then let's look at this world. What do we find in this world?
Consciousness.
We find consciousness. Is consciousness like a chemical? It's not. And therefore consciousness is itself a quantum of existence. You follow? And now consciousness is an irreducible facet of reality, like bosons, like neutrinos, then the source of the whole world, which had to contain all mass within it, would also have to contain what within it? Oh God, you guys are killing me. How can you not answer this question? I'm doing this so that like an 8-year-old should be able to answer. Follow me. The source of all reality, the universe, which has to have all mass within it, right? But now that we've determined that consciousness is an irreducible facet of reality, what must the source of the universe also possess? Oh God, wow. You guys are getting smart on me here. This is I'm we're doing it easy here. Like if you guys can't follow this, we got to do something else. We'll do some kirtan or something. We're not complicated here. This is simple stuff. Are you guys following? Now we have a conscious source of all reality. What's another name for a conscious source of all reality? God. Okay. But now we got to figure out the nature of God, right? Now, is that source going to be all powerful? Yeah, because it's a source of all the all powerful, indefatigable forces in the world. And so obviously it would contain all those forces within itself and therefore be all powerful. But how do we get to it's all good? Couldn't it be an angry or neutral or all good and evil or beyond conceptions such as good and evil, which is also a good answer? But how do we get to the idea that God is all good, that God's benevolent, that God's compassionate? Yeah. Yeah, you. Loud.
Dovetailing off what Sri said, you look at the nature of the world and what brings civilization forward, what connects.
You look at what makes the world sustainable. You look at what makes the world sustainable in socialization and mutualistic relationships. There's also parasitic relationships. There's also pre-social behavior amongst animals. But the eusocial animals and the pro-social animals always defeat the pre-social animals. That's why weak human beings with crappy fingernails and dull teeth who've got to wear clothes when it gets a little cold outside. I mean, like, do the ants have any problem right now? None whatsoever. Cats, dogs, they're all fine. But we got to dress up in warm clothes and we're all flipped out. And so how is it? Because we were able to cooperate, raise each other's young, share food, do all sorts of stuff, defend each other. Because we're deeply social entities. And social ability is what creates sustainability, especially for human beings. Now you can add a little argument to this, this actually gets slightly complicated. I'm like dismayed that you guys weren't able to answer my initial questions. This one, if you didn't follow, I wouldn't be totally heartbroken. Human beings are endowed with the innate capacity to philosophize and understand things. More so than any other animal on the planet, we have things like recursion and language that other animals simply do not have. We can ask big questions like, who am I, why am I here, what's the purpose of life? There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that animals ask such questions. In fact, it seems almost impossible that they would, given the size of their brain and the paucity of language and recursion in animal species that we can look at, and we can see it. And without that type of language, how can they even begin to think of these questions? Because these questions are thought of in language. Therefore, human beings on the planet are the only animal that can really ask these big questions. Therefore, it would make sense if God existed, the human beings would be made in God's image. And therefore, when we look specifically at human society and we look at what human beings are able to do that makes them sustainable, we do find that kindness and compassion and selflessness and altruism and being a part of something bigger than yourself is natural. And by looking at ourselves, we understand something about the nature of our Creator. Just like when we say logic working within the world, we understand that the Creator would also be logical. Did you guys follow that? And that would be a way to go beyond the parasitism and different types of relationships that exist within nature, and we could specify what makes human society sustainable. Did you guys follow that? And that's how you get to an all-good God. I mean, there's arguments, and then there's counters to those arguments, and you can go back and forth. But that's the rough skeleton. You have to have that conversation with somebody. Once you get, now if the person already accepts that God's all good and all powerful, then you're good. If it's one of the 5 billion people in the world, 6 billion people in the world who believe in an all good and all powerful God, then you're cool. You just go, you believe in all powerful, good, all powerful God? They say, yeah, and then you can just proceed to step number 2, like on a flow chart. If they don't, then you figure out what they believe in, and you take them the rest of the way. And I started from scratch so you guys would see the raw skeleton of the argument. Once you arrive in all good, all powerful God, this verse is automatically going to be true. Could an all good God help you? Yes. Would an all good God want to help you? Yes. Would you have to open the door? Yes. Why would you have to open the door? Because an all good, all powerful God would also give away some of his power to give you freedom so love could exist. Because that's a selfless and beautiful thing. You follow? So an all good, all powerful God would give you free will, in which case you need to open the door, and an all good God would want to help you, and an all powerful God could help you, and therefore the verse is true. Does that make sense? This is how I try to build a consensus about these verses. I don't ask people to believe these verses. Donald Trump in 2016, when he was running for president, he said, they've given you nothing for your votes. I will give you everything. I will give you what you wanted for 50 years. I'm the only one. He literally verbatim said those words at a rally. Right? It's like, man, that was like, I mean, like Kanye West thinks he calls himself Jesus, which is somehow he thinks he's like a weird pronunciation of Jesus. But that statement, that was like some old world biblical level stuff, you know? Right? Anyway, we'll get back to that. It's like pure demagoguery, like in its like most essential form. It wasn't even masqueraded. It wasn't even disguised. It was probably the most honest appeal for people's votes I've ever heard. Like, I'm just going to lie through I will give you everything. I'm the only one. It's like megalomania on full display. Anyway, so we're going to get back there, because that's actually, we're going to circuitous route because it's Sunday and I can't just start with my political rantings. I have to couch it in theology, so that's what we're doing here. An all good God could help an all powerful God. An all powerful God could help, an all good God would want to help. That's how I argue for the viability and the reason and the reason why people should have faith in, and the logic and the persuasiveness of the verses of our core texts. I look at whether these verses are congruent with an all-good and all-powerful deity, and in fact, if they're necessary for an all-good and all-powerful deity. A friend of mine's dying of cancer at the age of 42. Hopefully he's not dying. Hopefully the chemo is going to work. But he was worried about what's going to happen when he dies. And, Casey, what would you accept as evidence? Flip it around epistemically and put the burden of proof on them. What would you accept as evidence? That's a great one. I'd also do that. That's also like right out of my playbook too. Well done. Sometimes you flip it. What would you accept as evidence? Why am I negotiating with myself? You want to sell me that car? What do you want for the car? Well, what would you give me for the car? Hey, you know what? What do you want to sell the car for? Let's start with that. I'm not going to negotiate against myself. Do you follow? So you want evidence. Tell me what evidence is. Tell me what evidence you want. I'll go look for it. Then we got to start to reason what good evidence for the existence of a spiritual being would look like. Interestingly, you couldn't have foolproof evidence for the existence of God, because foolproof evidence for the existence of God would do what with free will? It would nullify free will. There would always have to be the possibility of not believing. Evidence would have to be available, but not available where it was undeniable, where you could cram people's faces into it, grind their noses into it, because that would mitigate free will. Do you guys follow that argument? That's some fancy footwork. Anyway, so I like to argue for an all-good and all-powerful deity and then look at verses from any text and see if they're congruent. Eternal hell, not all congruent. Exclusivism, I don't think it's congruent. Super judgmental, judging you for thought crimes, punishing you for thought crimes, incongruent. Christians hate this type of reasoning because it really messes with their biblical conception of divinity. It doesn't necessarily mess with Jesus per se, but it messes with a lot of the people around Jesus and a lot of the people who framed out the tradition after the time of Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount does pretty well. But like the teachings of Paul and some of the other apostles, they take a real hit, what to speak of the Old Testament, which just gets ravaged by an all-good, all-powerful God as your truth meter, as your litmus test, as your gold standard for determining what's valid and what's not. This is how I like to troubleshoot stuff. Anyway, this devotee was suffering his word. What happens when he dies? I read some verses from the Gita, where Krishna at one point calls Arjuna like my son, my dear son. Like those who are kalyan krit, those who do good, will never durgatim, they will never go to a bad place. And if you don't finish your yoga brush, say you don't finish your yoga gets broken and you die, you'll come back and you'll take birth in a family of sadhus, of saintly people. And you'll pick up again where you left off. And you'll automatically be attracted to Krishna consciousness. And by your previous work, you'll pick up where you left off. And I said to him, I go, you can have faith in these verses because wouldn't an all-good God, an all-powerful God, feel this way about you and do this for you? Wouldn't he give you another chance to finish? Wouldn't he not make you go back to zero? Wouldn't he let you pick up where you left off? Wouldn't he carry you? And this devotee, who's undergoing cancer with 2 small kids, he felt pacified. I don't like to say have faith in this verse. I don't like to pull a Trump. I like to look at the ramifications of believing in an all-good and all-powerful deity and what that does to your life. And what it does to your life is it removes fear, and that's why the Gita starts and finishes with the removal of fear. Because if God's all good and all powerful, and you're game, and you do your part, you're solid. There's a real famous astrologer in India. He said astrology is for sinful people. Prabhupada said this too. Astrology is for materialists. If you're a devotee and you're right with God, what are the planets going to do to you? They're going to do nothing to you. They can do nothing to you. It's only sinful people and low-class people and people who are trying to game the system and people who aren't game for just surrendering and going with the flow and being an instrument and being a part of something bigger than themselves. Those people need astrology and palm reading so they can machinate things and they can manipulate things in their favor. Inauspicious things become auspicious for a devotee. They're always held in Krishna's hand. They're peaceful. They're confident and humble. It's a winning combination, if there ever was one. You guys following this? Okay. Trump started a millenarian cult. Millenarianism is the belief that there is some kind of cataclysmic, apocalyptic, Armageddon-esque event that's going to take place. That you are dealing with the end of days, that you are the chosen people, that you have to suffer and generally fight and generally sacrifice, and that you will be the ones who usher in the new age. You guys following this? Jim Jones played this. That's how he killed all those people. Hitler played this. That's how he made Germany rise from the ashes. Germany was supposed to rule the world in a 1,000-year reign. The Germans were the chosen people. The Jews were mongrel hordes. They had cheated the Germans out of winning World War I. It was not Germans' fault. It was the Jews conspiring from within them like a plague. They had to extirpate the Jewish bloodline. They had to get rid of Jewish art and culture, which was so enmeshed in German society. They had to purify things through eugenics. And then the German people were going to be the chosen people who were going to save the world. The Jews were trying to exterminate them. The Jews had engaged in a totalitarian war to kill the German people, and therefore the German people could exterminate the Jews for self-preservation, and it was actually a noble thing to do. You can follow this? That was Hitler's program. That was Goebbels' program. That was Hitler's program. And it worked. Fascism, has this, it's the same idea. They're against us. We have to fight against them. The state has to step in and take control of everything. And there's a leader, an authoritarian figure at the head of the state. And that authoritarian figure is our savior. And they're going to lead us to the promised land and to our destiny. And we have to arm ourselves and fight and be ready to make the ultimate sacrifice to bring that vision in. It's an incredibly selfless act. And there's a leader who exemplifies that ideal. Authoritarian governmental structures don't really have constitutions. The leader is the constitution. Can you imagine Iraq without Saddam Hussein? No. There's no you're not going to vote Saddam Hussein out. You're not going to point to war crimes and impeach him. There's no impeachment process. He'll just go back in and rewrite the Constitution. There's kind of a floating Constitution around whatever he's doing on a given day. You follow? He himself is the law of the land, and his desires become the law of the land. Do you follow this? That's authoritarian structures. It's a key ingredient in fascism. Hitler did this. Trump's trying to do this. The Heaven's Gate cult did this. The Om Shinrikyo people did this in Japan when they gassed people. If you guys know about that, Google it. There's this idea. It's been around for all time. It's there in the Bible. There's a flood. Moses is saving the people from the flood. There's going to be a fire in the book of Revelations. And it's the second coming of the Messiah who's going to save the people. Jesus himself saved the people. It's there. We actually have it in our tradition. We have a golden age. We just don't. We think everybody's invited to the party. And there's no bloodshed that needs to be spilled. And the weapons of a usual apocalypse are replaced by the drum and the kartals, and we sing our way back to utopia. And everybody gets invited, and no one's ever uninvited. And everybody's welcome forever. And you play a critical role, and so does everybody else. And you're special, and so is every single other person. And you fully receive God's love, and you're empowered, and so is everybody else. This is what makes life worth living. It's what enables people to accomplish incredible things. It's at the cornerstone. Nietzsche said this. He said the cornerstone of every great civilization was an idea that was so big that everybody in that group was willing to die for it. We want to be part of something bigger. We have this incredible ability for socialization. We're the most social beings on the planet. We have this innate nature, necessity, proclivity towards working cooperatively with other people for something bigger than ourselves. It's the biggest ingredient in human happiness. On your way out of animal life, which is eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, on your way to self-realization, you pass through socialization in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's what makes human beings different than animals. And it's the portal through which you begin to leap towards transcendence. We want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. What we need to do is carefully examine what that bigger thing is. White, conservative America, the Red Sea, the flyover states, everything from Montana in the Pacific Northwest all the way down to Florida in the far southeast. That red swath that divides the real America, which is those two blue sections here and here. Where half our country lives, those people are Christian, white, God-fearing, conservative people who don't like gay people, who don't like minorities. They're xenophobic. They immigrated here long enough ago that they feel like they own the place now. And they've always been here. They created a myth they've always been here and just never question it. And the world's changing. And it's becoming multicultural. It's becoming a big melting pot. And this has happened. I mean, the Irish were the minorities a century ago. In New York, they were discriminated against. The Germans were discriminated against in the Midwest. We kicked the Indians out. They were loggers in the Pacific Northwest at the turn of the century, 1900s. We kicked them all out. Kicked the Chinese out, totally discriminated against them once they got finished building our railroad for us. We've been doing this for a long time. It's not like the American Indians tried to stop us from coming in, then we got rid of them so we could say we were the original ones. We got to like replace them. It's what people do. It's what the Jewish people did when they jumped in on the Palestinians. Stole their country. It's just what people have been doing for all time. So, white America, conservative America, is just watching the multicultural pandemic spread from sea to shining sea. As huge advancement is made in equal rights, the democratization of society, the rise of socialism. Like socialism is like a bad word. I mean, come on, universal health care is a socialist agenda. Who's going to say not into universal health care? It's like, I got food for everybody. You know what I mean? It's like, there's like a lot of stuff on the socialist agenda that's just part of any civilized group of people. That there's a safety net. But somehow the word socialism has been branded. You know what I mean? It's like a great exercise in branding. Like people are like, I'm not a socialist. Ignoring the fact that socialism is actually a great thing, in many ways. And if you're an absolute socialist, a pure socialist, who believes, in getting, like a communist ideal where there's one state and everything's owned by the state and it's a totalitarian form of government, that's a much different thing. I'm not sure, I don't see anybody arguing for that. Even people who are self-proclaimed socialists aren't arguing that. Even Stalin himself allowed for there to be small businesses in the USSR. He just wanted to control the main industries, but he allowed for people to have private industry. Even in the USSR, people own stores. Most people don't know that. They own stores, they own shops, they did business. Okay, so those people are freaked out. They see everything slipping away, and then comes the demagogue. And then comes the white knight, the fat orange knight with no core strength. Then comes the fat orange knight with like toupee from hell. And he speaks with the dog whistle. It's not even really a dog whistle. He says you should beat Antifa. I would let the cops beat them for longer. He says we're going to kick all the Muslims out. We're going to build a wall to keep the Mexicans out. The rapists and murderers. Some of them I assume are good people. I mean, the stuff he said like, you probably have to go back to the 50s to hear that kind of stuff. He was like unashamed. And he promised people that we were going to restore America to what it was. A country for white people. And they bought on. And then he won. That, for a political millenarian movement to win, that gave them so much confidence. I won then, I'm going to win now. And now Make America Great became Keep America Great. It's the greatest slogans ever that I've ever heard. The greatest political slogans I've ever heard for this country. Make America Great Again. It's like the best logo I've ever heard. He was really good at logos. Stop the Steal. It's got such a rhyme to it. Stop the Steal, fake news, Make America Great Again, Keep America Great Again. He was really good at it. Or his people were good, whatever. He had that kind of cowboy-esque thing going on. He's like the opposite of a cowboy. You know what I mean? But, he got in that truck that one time, was like tooting the horn. He looked like a 4-year-old. But he had enough of it. He had enough of it that it spoke to people. And then they won, and then this is it. It's going to work. They're going to save this country from the liberals and the gays and the minorities. Then he lost. The fact that he lost is the destruction of their cult. And so they're all throwing a temper tantrum. And that's what we're dealing with in the Capitol building. If the cops had just shot a few people, it would have ended the whole thing immediately. There was hundreds of people storming the chamber. One cop shot one girl in the neck, and that was it. All those people boogied. They all left. If they killed half a dozen people at strategic points, it would have been over. They didn't do that, so half a dozen people died anyway. But and then now they're all ennobled and emboldened that it's gonna, they're gonna win, and they're gonna do further demonstrations and rebellions and insurrections later on this month. It's not going to happen though. Trump's already been castrated. They took his Twitter account. He's done. It's over. It's like a snake with its head cut off. It writhes around the ground a little bit, but it's over. And everybody's going to move on. Because although those people are dedicated to Trump, and he does represent an ideal for them and makes them feel special and like they're part of something bigger than themselves, which is what makes us who we are and what we all have to go for. It's not like he was some kind of pure, saintly person, selfless person. And so it'll be very easy to give up. When you get it with a religion, it gets a lot deeper in your bones, because you're dealing with fundamental reality in an eternal sphere, and people won't do anything. Like, you're not going to break the back of Muslims. 9/11? In 1787, on 9/11, the Ottoman Empire came to an end. They attacked Vienna, the weather turned against them, and the Papal army beat them back. And it wasn't the Papal army, it was the Austrian army, but the popes were there. They were the Catholic country. They won. And that was the beginning of the end of the Ottoman Empire. And they started shrinking down. And so Osama bin Laden bombed the Twin Towers on 9/11 to let people know that they hadn't forgotten, and that 214 years later, they were back to the day. When you deal with the stuff with religion, it has much longer staying power. Trump won't. People forget him. What made him attractive was his power. That he won. Now that he's lost, it does not compute, because How could he lose? Because that would mean our whole thing was false. You follow? But that's the reality. And the whole QAnon, and that's the whole thing. There's these forces of evil. So it's like it's a pedophile ring. Then they're going to save the place. You follow? And they keep kind of reframing it because they were going to bring in a new administration, and that was his acknowledgement of defeat a couple days ago on Thursday. They immediately reinterpreted that. No, he's going to get rid of Pence and bring in he's going to bring in Michael Flynn, the retired general. And he's going to start a new country, and it's going to be a new administration. And that's what he meant. That was shared thousands of times. That interpretation of what he said. You follow? But they'll forget. It'll be over. And so here's the point I wanted to make. 2021 is off to a rough start. Pandemic is surging. Like really bad. 300,000 new cases yesterday in the U.S. Compare that to September when we had 25,000 new cases on September 7th. 4 months ago. It's a 12 times increase in the U.S. California's worse. California, in the beginning of October, 3 months ago, we had 2,600 new cases. A few days ago, we had 65,000 new cases. It's a 23-fold increase. Things are bad. 4,000 people is a new record, died in one day, same day as the Capitol riots. They stormed the Capitol building. It hasn't had that kind of an insurrection since 1814. It was ridiculous. Like the worst security I've ever seen. Such a fail. But what are the cops going to do? Shoot people? All the cops are also castrated because the whole BLM thing made cops afraid to shoot anybody. George Floyd was murdered, but then even there was that guy who was murdered in Madison, whose name is escaping me for the moment. He was carrying a knife, and he just assaulted his baby mama, his ex-girlfriend, and she called the cops on him, and he was fighting the cops with a knife in his hand, and he got shot, and people started claiming that was as egregious an abuse as George Floyd. But the two things are totally dissimilar. One was a man getting murdered innocently in cold blood. The other was a convicted felon brandishing a weapon, fighting with police officers who just assaulted his girlfriend. You see the difference? So everybody's so scared to use force. So this happened. They're not going to be scared to use force anymore. They're going to find the middle way somehow where they use appropriate force in the appropriate direction. Probably everybody being white had something to do with it too. It lulled them into a false sense of security. Now they realize they shouldn't do that. But yeah, here's what I was going to say. 2021 is off to a rough start. And you should not fear. There's just absolutely no reason to fear. Krishna's still God. We still got an all-good and all-powerful deity. And the ramifications of that truth supersede and minimize all the comings and goings of this world. It's all happened before. History is merely repeating itself. It seems like it's just awful. But they used to crucify people in public, upside down. They used to do trial by ordeal, where they have you stick your hands in boiling oil, or walk on hot coals, or they dunk you in a river, and if you survived, you were innocent. They used to settle land disputes by having the people fight, and whoever won, then that land must have been theirs. Trial by combat, trial by ordeal, these things used to be the norm. They used to torture people to get the truth out of them. That was testimony that wasn't given under torture wasn't as reliable because people were more likely to lie. The world was an awful place. 100 years ago, women couldn't vote. 60 years ago, black people couldn't drink out of the same drinking fountain. The world's becoming a better place. And bad stuff happens. But worse stuff used to happen. And the bad stuff of today was like a walk in the park 50 years ago. And so we shouldn't get too spun out. We should understand history. We should see the pendulum as just swinging back and forth. We should have some faith. We should do our duty, which is to surrender to Krishna. And we should be peaceful. Stay above it all. It's just like a poorly thought out cult that's just not going to long endure. It's amazing how similar it is to fascist and religious cults and like the millenarian movement in general. And everybody says I'll die for this movement, but you know what? They're all lying. You know how you know they're all lying? Because none of them carry guns into the Capitol building. You're really ready to take over the country? Then bring all of your assault rifles into the Capitol building. But how come there wasn't a single gun amongst those rioters? One guy had a gun in his car down the street, and that was like made like national headlines. Are you kidding me? You go to Kentucky today, they had like dozens of militia in full camo gear and balaclavas with assault rifles on the front steps of the Capitol building. And they were going to go in the Capitol building, but they were closed on Sunday for COVID, so they couldn't go in. Otherwise, they were going to roam around the halls of the Capitol building, because that's what people do in Kentucky and Minnesota. They carry assault rifles into the Capitol building with hundreds of rounds, because they're allowed to because of the state laws regarding like open carry being legal. Open carry is not legal in Washington, D.C. Guess what would have happened if those protesters, or those rioters, had carried a gun into the Capitol building? Huh? They would have immediately been killed by police. Snipers would have immediately taken them out. But if they're so rebel, if they're not just a bunch of tryhards, then why didn't they bring their guns? You follow? Everybody acts crazy until you punch them in the face, shoot their friend in the neck, then all of a sudden everybody starts getting real sane. You know? I can't tell you how many guys like screaming at me, I'm Jesus, and freaking out in the cops roll up and I'm like, hello, officer. I was just minding my own business, and this Hare Krishna person accosted me. Like, immediately everybody gets real sane. It'll all blow over. Right, don't give them ideas. They know what they're doing. They talked a big game online. But when it came down to it, nobody brought a gun. And the moment they started shooting, everybody ran. That's not how war works. War works, you send in the first guys, they get killed, and then you step on their dead bodies, and you get a little further, then you get killed, and the next guy step on your dead bodies, and over a mountain of dead bodies, you scale the walls of the enemy's fortifications. These people are all weak, eating hot dogs and white bread. They're not built for a fight. They're all recording themselves. People don't record themselves in war. They're too busy trying to kill the enemy and to not get killed themselves. They're all like, taking selfies, recording little clips, putting something on their reel, looking cool. I was there. It's like a big game. But they got the win, so they got 4 years. And they went to their head. And then you took their toy away. Like my daughter, when I take the phone away and she can't watch cartoons anymore, she freaks out. Has a little mini panic attack. And that's what we're dealing with. It's all going to work out. They'll figure out how to police things. I mean, we figured out how to police people. We were suppressing the civil rights movement. I don't know how the cops all of a sudden forgot everything. You need water cannons. You need shields. You need batons. You need rubber bullets. You need like heavy-duty pepper spray, heavy-duty tear gas. You need to be liberal with its usage. You know? They can control a crowd of 1 million people. They know how to do it. They just like forgot their goodie bag at home. And so they'll figure it out. Everything will be okay. Trump will be gone. Nobody's been able to make competition for Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and Amazon. He's got no chance. Other guys have tried. Gab tried. Everybody's been trying. People have been trying to make an online platform. No one can do it. And if Trump tries to start his own TV show, he's got to compete with Fox News. That's never going to happen. They're going to turn on him like so fast if he starts affecting their bottom line. He's not going to make a TV show. He's not going to make his own online platform. He's done. Big tech turned off his lights. We can't even hear from him anymore. We don't even know what he says anymore. He's got no more access to 90 million people. It's going to take a few weeks, a lot of noise. It's all going to calm itself down. Couple more people might die. It's not light, but we got 4,000 people dying a day. It's not the end of the world. You got to see the big picture. And from our side, what do? We're just peaceful. Because even if a demagogue did come into power and we had a fascist form of government, I'm still going to chant my rounds every day. I'm still going to follow the 4 golden principles. I'm still going to practice religion either covertly or overtly. I'm still going to do missionary work. I'm still going to live the life I'm living. You follow? We got devotees in the Middle East. Somehow or other, they're practicing their tradition. We got devotees in Russia who are in prison for their beliefs. Like, we still got it. We got a bunch of like white people first world problems. Even if you're black in this country, you got a bunch of white people first world problems compared to the rest of the world. People aren't dying of hunger here. And a couple people dying in civil unrest. That type of civil unrest is like commonplace. That's like a Tuesday in other countries. And here it's like national headline news with massive reform coming in its wake. Things are good here, and they're getting better. Everything will be okay. Pendulum swinging. Don't get freaked out by it. Follow Krishna's advice. Don't be afraid. Don't fear. Relax. Do your job, which is surrender to Krishna. Purify yourself, and everything will work out. And the more purified you get, the more you can see that everything's happening exactly as it should be, and everything will work out. Okay. That's my thoughts for the day. Thank you very much. You can keep them up.